Dr. Heilige Gemara. We're starting from the bottom of Daf Tes on base. But before we start, I just want to review some of the things that we learned yesterday about the timing. We learned that let's change over to Tes Amar Aleph so we can quickly look at the Gemara. So it was a little bit complicated yesterday, so I want to just do a quick review. So the Gemara yesterday started with the history of the Persian Empire, of the Greek Empire in Eretz Yisrael. The Rabbi Yosy Chalafta seemed to have said that 180 years, I'm sorry, not the Greek, the Roman Empire, 180 years before Churban Bayis is when the Roman Empire started. The problem is that the Brisa we quoted at the top of Daf Tes Amar Aleph says that the Roman Empire started 206 years before Churban Bayis. So there's a 26-year discrepancy. The Gemara says that 26-year discrepancy is because in the beginning, for the first 26 years, the Romans and the Chashmonaim were working together. So that wouldn't be called Pashto Machos Harashah al Yisrael. But after 26 years of working together, they started oppressing Klal Yisrael. So Kum Techois, 180 years was the amount of time during the end of the period of the Churban Bayis Sheni that the Romans were oppressing the Eden. It was Pashta Malchus Harshal Yisrael. Then Rav Papa said the Soifrim, even after the Churban Bayis, when they dated a star, they always dated it based on how many years it's been since the origins of the Malchus Yava. So if we're post Churban Bayis and we want to use a date based on Churban Bayis, we need to figure out a way to know what year it would be. Now, people do not get mixed up with centuries. So we're not concerned about centuries. We're just looking at the tens and the ones. So we know that the Malchus Yovan started 380 years before Churban Bayis. So the turn of the century would be at the year 400, which would be 20 years after the Churban Bayis. However, if you're counting from the Churban Bayis, the first century would be 100 years later. 100 years later, weiter, the Malchus of Yavin would only be 480 years old. So there's a 20-year offset. So all our Papa says is, if you want to know what the tens and the ones are, all you do is look at what the tens and the ones are in the years when you're calculating the time since Malchus Yavin was established, and if you add 20 years to it, then you will have the number of years since Churban Bayis. Vice versa, if you have the amount of years since Churban Bayis and you subtract 20 years from it, then you will have the amount of years since the Malchus Yavani. Now, this is only regarding the tens and the zeros. The centuries, you'll keep track besides that. On that note, the Gemara uses the same idea of once you know what the offset is, then you'll be able to do the conversion from the Yavani dates to the dates of Churban Bayis. So we learned that there's 3 trimesters in the world. The first 2,000 years, or the first 2 millennia, was called Soyu because there was no Torah yet in the world. The second set of 2,000 years would be called Torah because that's when Torah came to the world. Now, even though Kabbalah Torah was not in the year 2000, rather it was in the year 2448, the year 2000 is the year that Avraham Avinu opened up his Baal Tshuva Yeshiva when he was 50 years old. We know he was born in the year 1948. You add 52 years to that, and you get 2000. Beginning of the 3rd millennium, that's when Avraham Avinu introduced the Kodesh Baruch Hu and Torah to the world. And that goes on for 2,000 years. Now, interesting enough, at the end of those 2,000 years, then the world is 4,000 years old. 172 years before that 4,000-year period was Churban Bayis Sheni, which was in the year 3828. which is 172 years before the year 4000. So zogt the Heilige Gemara, if you want to figure out how many years have passed in that third period. Now, the third period is called Yemosha Mashiach, because that was the period of time when Mashiach is supposed to come. We would have hoped that he would have come at the beginning of that period. Now we're pushing already towards the end of that period, but as Hashem, Mashiach will come soon. So if you want to be able to calculate how many years we are into that 4,000 to 6,000 year period, we can still work off a conversion from the date since Malchus Yovan took over. So let's think. The last 380 years of the second Beis Hamikdash is what the Malchus Beis Yovan was in power. Malchus Beis Yovan was in power. And then you have 172 years until the year 4000. So if you add up 172 plus 380, you get 552, which means the 52 year since Malchus Yovan lines up to the 0 year of a millennium. So there's an offset of 52. So it's very simple to get the conversion from the date on the star that would be based on the Malchus Yovan. All you do is either you add 48 or subtract 52, and then you get an equal century. So that was the second halacha we learned. Now, turning on to Tes Amud Beis, the Gemara offered another conversion that we were looking for, and that is, how do we know to calculate today when Shemitah is? So we know that the year before the Churban Bayis was a Shemitah year. It's actually a machloikis rishonim if that was in the year 3827 or if it's in the year 3828. There's some other shittas, but whenever that was, it's pretty simple to figure out if this year is a Shemitah year. You just go in multiples of 7. So you take the year of the Churban, you subtract 1, which would take you to the first year, which would take you to a Shemitah year, and then you just can continue to count 7 multiples of 7, and you'll be okay. The only issue we have to deal with is that follows the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, where the year of Yovel, which was year 50, was actually year 1 of the next Shemitah cycle. So it was just a whole bunch of 7-year cycles. But the Chachamim hold that Yovel was year 50, and then the year after that was year 1, which means every 50 years, the Shemitah year gets pushed off by 1 year. So then that's how you would have to make the calculation. Then the Gemara told us that Reb Chanina told us, as well as we read from Brisa, that once you were in the period of Yemosha Mashiach, it's a very bad idea to invest even a small amount of money to buy property in Chutz La'aretz. Because Be'ez Hashem, Mashiach will come soon, and then we're going to give up any property we have in Chutz La'aretz, and we're going to all move to Eretz Yisrael. Therefore, it's not a good idea to buy property. Now we're up to the bottom line of Daf Tes Amud Beis. That is a Hushtara of Eksiv Bey. There was a star that was dated 506, the year 506, and that would be 506 since the establishment of the Greek regime. So let's have a look at this. Shish Shnin Yeserta. So really, it happened to have been 500 years from the period of Malchus Yovan. So let's think. Malchus Yovan started 380 years before Churban Bayis. So if we want to get the 500 years, it's 120 years after Churban Bayis was the year 500. In the year 500, someone wrote a star, but the Sefer wrote 506. So he post-dated the star. So Sover Rabbanon, Kamei Derova, Lememar, High Star Mu'ucher. This is what we call a post-dated star, and the post-dated star is kosher. What all it means is that the Malva will not be able to collect from the Kuchais that purchased from this Loiva before the year 506. That's all it means, but it's a kosher star. So therefore, mu'uchahu ni akfe ad motis manei v'loy tarif. Up until 6 years later, after the loan was given, the malva cannot be tarif from the loan. Omar Rav Nachman, maybe not. High Safra Davkana Kosfe. Maybe the Sefer meant this year is the date on the star. It's only 500 years since the establishment of the Greeks. Why did he write 506? The Hanach Shishnin, the extra 6 years, is the Molchu Ba'elam. The Yavanim took over and controlled Elam 6 years before they took over Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, the Sefer might be counting from not when they took over the whole Eretz Yisrael, which was 380 years before the Korban. Rather, the Sefer was referring to when they established Malchus in Elam, which was 386 years before the Korban. We normally don't count those 6 years. However, maybe the Sefer considered those years as part of the Malchus Shaban. When he's writing 506, he means today. And this star is a good star, and it's called a star for today. And therefore, it's a good star even for today. Zok to Gemara, the Tanya we learned, Rabbi Yosy Omer, Sheish Shonim Molchu Be'elam, before the Avoda took over all of Yisrael, there were only rulers in Elam, V'achach Pashto Malchusan, V'chol Olam Chulei. And only later, 6 years later, did they take over the world. Matzka Flor Rab Acha Bar Yaakov. Mimai de la Malchus Yavonim Anina. How do we know that this Sefer Bechlal is even counting 506 years from the Yavonim? Maybe Dilma Yitzias Mitzrayim Anina. Maybe he's counting from Yitzias Mitzrayim. So you're going to ask me, Yitzias Mitzrayim wasn't 506 years ago; it was 1,500 years ago. But so really, maybe it's really 1,500 years ago, and he wrote 506. And indeed, it is a star ma'ucher. By ma'ucher, he's postdating it by 6 years, because really today is 1,500 years from Yetzias Mitzrayim. How come he said 500, not 1,500? Because v'shavke la'alfa kama v'nokte alpha basra. Millennium, we don't need to mention. Everybody knows Yetzias Mitzrayim was long ago. So therefore, he's not mentioning the millennium. He's just mentioning the years in this millennium, similar to us. We say Tov Shein Pei Zayin, right? We don't say Hey, because we know what millennium we're in. So too, maybe that's what the Sefer meant. Now, where do you get that we're 1,500 years past the Korban? How is it that it aligns? That's 500 years, which is 120 years after Korban Bayis, should line up to 1,500 years from Yetzias Mitzrayim. So Rashi makes a simple question. We know that from Yetzias Mitzrayim to the time they built the first Beis Hamikdash was 480 years. We know the first Beis Hamikdash was 410 years. So 480 plus 410 is 890. Then there were 70 years of Galus Bavel. So 890 plus 70 is 960. Then we had 420 years of Bayesheni. So 960 plus 20 is 980, plus 400 is 1080, 1180, 1280, 1380. So it's 1,380 years to Churban Bayis Sheni. And now we're 120 years after Churban Bayis, which is exactly 1,500. So the Sefer wrote 1506 because he was referring to the date of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and he is postdating the star 6 years. Maybe that's what's happening. And the Shofke la Alpha Kama, he's ignoring the first millennium, the Nokte Alpha Basra, and the Haimorchun at the Star Mocher. Omer Rab Nachman, that cannot be the case, because now that we're in Golos, it's universal that everybody dates their stories based on the Malchus Yavonim. So who asked this kasha to Rab Nachman? Rab Acha Bar Yaakov. Rab Acha Bar Yaakov thought that Rab Nachman was just pushing him off. The Chuyik HaMatchilei. But when he looked into it, he saw, in fact, that is the way it is. Nofak dok ve'ashkrach. He looked around and he found a brisa that says that, in fact, stars are dated based on the Yevani Malchus. The Tanya we learned, Bagoila ein moinin elul machi Yevanim bilvad. From before brisa. Omar Avinu, not only is a brisa, but nisan nami deka. We have a Mishnah that also supports this argument, and that is it's non we learned. Be'echad b'Nisan Rosh Hashanah l'malachim. The Mishnah Rosh Hashanah said that the first of Nisan, Rosh Chodesh Nisan is Rosh Hashanah l'malachim. Ula regalim and fayamim toivim. The Gemara explains what does it mean Rosh Hashanah l'malachim. L'malachim l'mayhilchasa. Amr abchista. It's l'shtaris. So when you date shtaris, Nisan is the month where the year changes. Utanan, we had another Mishnah that says, Be'echad b'Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah l'shanim u'l'shmitin. What does it mean, Rosh Hashanah l'shanim? I mean, l'shanim l'mayhel p'sa, v'armab chista l'shtaris. So it's kosher shtaris adoni. We have one Mishnah that says that the Rosh Hashanah for shtaris is Nisan, and we have the second Mishnah that says that the Rosh Hashanah for shtaris is Tishrei. So what is it? Zok to Gemara. Umishanin, and the Gemara answered, Kan l'malcha Yisrael, Kan l'malcha oivdei kechavim. The month that the year for a Malach Yisrael changes is different than the month with which the year for the Melech Oivdei Kechavim changes. L'malcha oivdei kechavim mitishrei meninon. You know when the Goyish king's year changes? In Tishrei. L'malcha Yisrael minisa meninon. You count from Nisa. V'anan hashta, and nowadays what do? Mitishrei Maninon, which is based on the Malchus of the Goyim, the Malchus of the Avoda. Zok to Gemara, V'yisolka dadach litis Mitzrayim Maninon. If you hold that we're dating Shtaris, we're basing it on how many years since you see this Mitzrayim, why would we ever count from Tishrei? Minisan ba'inon lemimni. We would surely count from Nisan because that's in fact when Yetzias Mitzrayim was. Elav Shemamino, the Mishnah concludes that we count the years from Tishrei. It must not be referring to Yetzias Mitzrayim, rather L'malchei Yevanim Meninon Shemamino. Beautiful. Now we're going to get into a beautiful Gemara that has some beautiful stories about Rebbe and Antoninus that the Gemara shares with us. So the Mishnah says, the Yom Ginusya Shel Malcheim, the special day of the kings, is a day that's called a dayan, that you're not allowed to do business with them 3 days before. What exactly is this day? It's Yom Shemamidim Boy Oivdei Kavmis Malkum. It's inauguration day for their king. Frank the Gemara, how could you say that's what Yom Ginusya means? For Tanya, the Bride says Yom Ginusya v'Yom Shemamidim Boy Es Malkum. So it cannot be, Yom Ginusya cannot possibly be the day that they inaugurate a new king, because the Mishnah, the Brisa clearly says, lists them off as 2 separate days. Yom Ginusya is one day of a dayan, and the Yom Shemamidim B'malachim. So they're clearly 2 separate days. How could we say that Yom Ginusya means the day that a melech gets inaugurated? Zok Gemara lo kasha. Hadidei hadavarei. Maybe one is the day that the king himself gets inaugurated, and the other one is the day that he gives the malchus over to his son. That's also a day of Yom Midei. It's also a Yom Tov. Frank Gemara, but that's not true. Umi mukmi malka bar malka. We're talking about everything here in Rome, right? These are all the Yom Tovim of Rome. Rome are Avoda Zara. So Frank the Gemara, in Rome, they never used to have succession from one king to his child. Rather, every king was picked by the Senate, the one that was most royal to do the job. And that rarely was the child of the previous ruler, because they're raised with no discipline. So therefore, Umimukmi, Malka bar Malka, they didn't do that. But Tanya Rabbi Yosef said, the Navi talks with great derision against the Malchus Roimi, and he says, Hine katin asatich goyim. You're small amongst goyim. What does that mean? She'ein Moshiven Melech ben Melech. They don't ever appoint the son of a king to be the next king. Bozi atamaoid, the pasuk says. You're muvuz of the nation. She'ein lem loiksab. You don't have a Ksav v'loy loshen. There's a big shadow what this means. Either it means they don't have an alphabet or a language. Their language and alphabet is adopted from Greek. There are those who learn that Greek was a language that scholars spoke, and the Roman language was spoken by the riffraff. But the Ben Yehoyada, the Mesivta brings down from the Ramban who writes a history book that Loy Ksav means they don't even have the New Testament, V'loy Loshen, and they don't even have the Sprach of the New Testament. And therefore, the way Rome was built is really Christianity was made by the Bnei Esau, by Edom. And what happened is the Bnei Edom moved in to Rome, and the Romans joined the Bnei Edom, and they accepted the religion that the Bnei Edom came with, and they became mixed. So therefore, they don't really have their own identity. Their whole being is adopted from Bnei Edom. Ella, my Genusya. So if Genusya doesn't mean the inauguration of the king, and it doesn't mean the inauguration of the king's son, so then what does it mean? Zok to Gemara, you know what it means? Zok to Gemara, this is what it means. It means Yom HaLeit. It means his birthday. It means the birthday of the king. But frankly, tomorrow we have a brisa that also listed separately from Yom Genusya. But Tanya Yom Genusya via Yom HaLeit. So how could they be both? So tomorrow maybe like Kasha, how do they have the break? Yom Genusya maybe is the birthday of the king, and Yom HaLeit is the birthday of the king's child. Frankly, you can't say that because Batanya Yom Genusya Shaloi, and it says Yom Genusya Shal B'nai. So Yom Genusya cannot be birthday of one or the other because Yom Genusya applies both to Shaloi and both to B'nai. It also lists off Yom HaLeit Shaloi and Yom HaLeit Shal B'nai. So we're back to square one. What is Yom Genusya? It can't mean the day of inauguration because you don't inaugurate the son of the king. Elamayim Genusya, Zok Gemara, it is Yom Shemamidin by Malcolm. It is the day that they anoint the king. What about the fact that they're never mimed a king in Rome who is the son of a king? It's still referring to the son. We said already, we established that in Rome they don't appoint the son of a king to be the next king. There's an exception to that. If the king goes to the Roman Senate and asks them to accept his son, and they analyze his son and check out the son and determine that he is fit to be king, that would be the exception where they would make the son of the king a king. And then it makes sense that Yom Genusya, it's Noim Genusya Shal B'nai, because it's the day that his son was appointed in those rare cases when the son was appointed. Okay, gewaltig. Zog to Gemara. And we have an example of just such a case. Kagoin Asvirus bar Antoninus. Antoninus, we know, was a great king of Rome who was very close with Rebbe, and he had a son who was appropriate to be the king, and he ended up taking over the Malchus from Antoninus. The Malach, this son, Asvirus, actually became king. How did this story happen that he became king? What happened was, Omer le Antoninus le Rebbe. Antoninus asked Rebbe advice how he should approach this request that he wants his son to be the king. I want my son to be my replacement. This is Avid Tferia Kalani. I also have another request. I want the city of Tferia that has a lot of Talmidei Chachamim there, and I love Talmidei Chachamim. I want it to become a tax-free zone. Now, the Emalahu Chada Abdi Trela Abdi. The problem is, if I ask the Senate for these two requests, they'll give me one, they won't give me both. This is what Rebbe advised Antoninus to do. He said, I see Gavra Arkeve Achavre. Take one person and make him sit on the shoulders of his friend. So now you have someone giving somebody else a shoulder on. And give a dove to the guy sitting on top. have him hold it in his hand. And then, tell the guy on the bottom, Amr la'ela, tell the fellow on your soldiers, the lemifrach min yodei, he should free the dove and send it off. So that was a cryptic message from Rebbe to Antoninus. We're soon going to see why couldn't Rebbe answer Antoninus straight. Why did he answer in a cryptic fashion? But we'll get there shortly. But in the meantime, what does this cryptic message mean? Omar, Antoninus said, Shemami no, I think this is what Rebbe means to tell me. Halikamerli, at boy minayu disrisos berihim lachtachusi. Only ask one request. Ask that your son should take over. And then once your son takes over, the aim alay las virus the taveria klanya. Then once your son is king, ask your son to make this rule that Tveria should be a tax-free zone. So basically, you'll put your son on your shoulders, so to speak, and then you'll tell your son to send the yoina away. So that was Rebbe's cryptic way of telling Rebbe how to deal with this scenario. Omar Lay, Antoninus had a problem, and again he shared it with Rebbe, and he asked for advice. Omar Lay mitzarin li chashuve remoy. The chashuve remoy are bothering me. I'm being bothered by them. They're harassing me. So again, Rebbe gave cryptic advice. He told him, Ma'ayale legina, take them into your garden. Kol yoima, every day, akarle pugla mimashra. Pull one radish out of the row. Kameh in front of her. Omar, so again, Antoninus figured what was Rebbe's cryptic message. Shmami nahachik omerli. This is what he meant to say. At ketoil chad minayu. Every day, kill one at a time. Don't kill them all in one shot, because that's going to create a huge pushback and protest. Don't fight with all of them. So, Freik the Gemara, let's turn on to Daf Yud Amud Beis. Why couldn't the Rebbe just answer straight? Why did he have to answer in such a cryptic fashion? Let him just give him the proper advice. Omar, Rebbe was afraid. Shami chashuvi roimi, they'll hear the advice that I gave. They'll bother me. So, frankly, you don't have to broadcast it. Whisper it to Antoninus what to do. Zok Gemara, there's always a little birdie that's gonna carry and say over what I said, because it says in the pasuk, a little birdie will carry it. I'm going to read from the Torah Hasholim. There's a whole pasuk there. It says, Gam b'madach, even when you're in a private place, melech al tekalel, never curse a king. Uvechadri mishkavcha, even if in your bedroom, so you have privacy, al tekalel osher, never curse an osher. Ki oif hashemayim yoylech esakoil. A little birdie, the walls have ears, a little birdie is going to carry that. Uvitzel kanafayim yuga dover. It's going to be found out. So Rebbe didn't even want to advise Antoninus privately. He only spoke in a very cryptic fashion to protect himself from the message ever getting into the hands of someone who doesn't need to see it. And again, Antoninus had an experience, and he asked Rebbe's advice. Hahu Barta, the Shema Gira. Antoninus had a daughter whose name was Gira. Ka'avdei Surah, she was Mizana. Of course, Antoninus was upset about what his daughter did. So he sent a message to Rebbe, Gargira. He sent a fig, but Gargira also is a symbol. Gargira, my daughter Gira, Gar did an Avera. So Rebbe answered back by also sending him something that was a message. Shadalai Kusparta, which is some type of plant, but it stands for kois, chop off the head, Barta of your daughter. So Shadarlay, so Antoninus sent back a crazy. Crazy is a crest, I think. But that means Karsi, you want me to cut my generations? You want me to kill my daughter? Shalachlay, so Rebbe sent back Chasa, a lettuce, which also means Havrachmanis. So that's how they sent these cryptic messages, just by sending different produce to each other. They understood the message that each other was relaying. Kol Yoima have a Shadarlay to have a pricha every day. Antoninus wanted to enrich Rebbe, so he would send him nuggets of gold, but he didn't want anybody to know that he was sending nuggets of gold. So what he did was he put him into a big leather sack, b'matrasa, but he didn't fill up the whole sack with gold. He only filled it up halfway. The chiti apamayu, and the whole top was covered with wheat. So anybody looking at the sack would think it's full of wheat. Now I said half. It doesn't mean half. It just means the top layer was chitim, so nobody would chop what's going on underneath. They think there was a full sack of chitim. Amar lahu, and he would tell his shliach, "Am tuya chiti le Rebbe, take these chitim to Rebbe," and the shliach would not ever know that there was any gold in there. Amar Rebbe sent back a message to Antoninus, "Lo tzerichna, I don't need your gold. Isli tuva, I have tons of my own money." Omar, so Antoninus said, "No, I want you to hold it. Either lahava lemand basrach, let it go to the one after you, let it go to your children. The Yavel Basroi, they can give it to their children. The Asa Basrach that come after you, Uda Asa Minayu, Nepakalayu, and those people that come from you could spend the money and pay it back to the Romans." What does that mean? Rashi explains, I'm a good leader. I'm not going to oppress the Eden. But in the future, when I'm not around, there will be leaders that will be oppressive to the Eden, and you're going to have to bribe them. I want to give you all the money that you're going to need to bribe them. So basically, you're going to be like a typical liberal government in Canada. You're going to bribe them with their own money. Zog to Gemara, Rebbe, I'm sorry, there was a cave or a tunnel. There was a tunnel or a cave that extended from the house of Antoninus to the house of Rebbe. Now, if Antoninus lived in Rome and Rebbe lived in Tveria or Tzipuri, that's a very long tunnel. So the Mefarshim explained that there was a city called Roimi right near Tveria, which is where Rebbe lived, so it was a relatively short tunnel. And every day, Antoninus used to go learn Torah by Rebbe, would go be Mishamish Rebbe. He didn't want anybody to know, so he was able to go through the tunnel. So Zog to Gemara, Havlahina Krasa, Dava Isla Mebese Lebeis Rebbe, Kol Yoima have a Maisi Trey Avdi. Every day, Antoninus wouldn't go by himself. He would take two servants with him. Chad Kotle above the Rebbe. One took him straight to the house of Rebbe. He went all the way through the tunnel, and he came with him to the house of Rebbe. Then he killed this guard because he didn't want him to say over that he went to Rebbe or even where Rebbe's house is. And then he came home, and on the way home, there was the servant that was waiting for him at the beginning of the tunnel on Antoninus' side of the tunnel, and he would meet him and take him home to his house. Kotle above the Rebbe, then he would kill the other guard because he didn't want anybody to know about anything. I'm not sure how he was able to get volunteers for this lifetime position, because anybody who had this position would have it for the rest of their life, which would be maybe an hour longer. But that's what he did. Amrlay, he told Rebbe, whenever I come to your house, please, loy nishkach gever kamach. I don't want anybody else in the house. I don't want anybody knowing that I'm here. Yom Echad, one day, he saw in Rebbe's house was Reb Chanina bar Chama. So he got upset with Rebbe. Omar loy amina loch beidne dasina loy nishkas gever kamach. Didn't I ask you that when I come you shouldn't have anybody there? So Rebbe answered, Omar, don't worry about him. Less Dain bar Inish. She's not a man. Either he meant he was a malach, or he meant he's like a malach because he's 100% trustworthy and the word will never get out. So what happened is Antoninus wanted to check how choshev this person really was. So Omar Abda, the Gani Ababa, please, one of my servants is sleeping at the front gate of the house. Now we know he was dead, but he didn't tell that to Rab Chanina bar Chama. He said he's sleeping. Wake him up, tell him to come here. The Kodim Vilesi, he should come here. So Azul Rab Chanina bar Chama, we saw the guy was dead. So he's thinking to himself, what should I do? Omar Hechi Ovid. If I go back and tell Antoninus that the guy's dead, you're not supposed to go back and deliver bad news to your Mishalech. It's not appropriate. Ashvike, should I just get out of there? The Azel. That's not nice. It's not respectful to the Melech, to Antoninus. So you know what he did? No sweat. It was either regular day at the office. Boy, he davened and he made Chias Mason. Made Chias Mason. The Shadre, and he sent him to go to Antoninus just like he was asked. So this guy shows up to Antoninus, and Antoninus saw that Rab Chanina bar Chama made Chias Mason, and he said And he said, unbelievable. He said, Amar Yadana Zuti Dispuchu, even your regular, simple Talmidim, Mechayim Mesim, could be Mechayim Mesim. But he still told Rebbe, but still, Miu Be'inadasina Lo Nishkach Inishkamach. I still ask you, please, when I come, no matter how choshev they are, please make sure that no one's in the house when I come. Kol Yoima, have a Meshamash Rebbe. Every day, Antoninus would serve Rebbe like a servant. Machale, he would feed him. Mashale, he would give him to drink. And if you have a boy, Rebbe Lamesek Leporia, when Rebbe wanted to climb onto his bed, have a Gochen Karmeporia, he would bow, he would go on his knees, on his hands and knees, to act like a step stool in front of the bed. And Omle would tell Rebbe, Sok Eloi, climb up on me, Leporia, to your bed. Rebbe said, that's too much already. Amar lav oirach ara l'zulzulei b'malchusa kulahai. To such an extent to be mizalzel l'malach I can't. So what did Antoninus answer? Amar halavai miyasimenu matzah tachtecha lo'elam haba. Halavai, I should be your footstool or your mattress that you rest on in olam haba. Now, in fact, we'll see in a moment, Antoninus came to olam haba, but he wasn't in the mechitza of Rebbe. He wasn't zoicha to be in the high level where Rebbe was. He was further away. So he was only wishing Halavai should be able to be in the environs of Rebbe. Amalai, he asked Rebbe, Asina la'amadasi, will I come to Olam Haba? Amalai, you will come. So Antoninus says, but how will I come? Amalai, v'aksiv la'yiyah sarid lebeis Esav. The pasuk says, the Navi tells Esav, you're not going to have anything left of you. So of course I'm not going to make it to Olam Haba. Rebbe said, don't worry, that's ba'oisam Esav. That's only referring to people who act like Esav. You might be from Esav, but you don't act like Esav. You will have Olam Haba. Tanya Dami Hachi, Lo Yisarid Lebeis Esav, Yochel Lakoil. You might have thought that anyone who descends from Esav will never get into Olam Haba. Hamad Loimer Lebeis Esav, his house. Meaning, Ba'oisam Esav, he does actions and he behaves like Esav. Amalei Antoninus says, B'aksiv. Again, we're talking about the kilkul that's going to happen and the destruction that Edom is going to suffer. Shama Edom, Malchel, its kings, B'chol Nesiyah, and all Nesiyim. Amalei Rebbe said, no, Malchel. It doesn't say Kol Malchel. It says Malchel. Yeah, its kings will be destroyed. V'loi Kol Malchel. You're an exception. Kol Nesiyah, all of its Nesiyim. V'loi Kol Sarah, but not all of its officers. Tanya Namiyachi, Malchaya, V'loi Kol Malchaya, Kol Nesiyah, V'loi Kol Sarah. So Malchel V'loi Kol Malchel. Not all the kings. Who is the exception? Which king from Edom will not be destroyed, will be able to come to Olam Haba? Prat Antoninus ben Asvirus. Antoninus was the exception of the Edomi king who was Zoichet to Olam Haba. What about Kol Nisiyah V'loi Kol Sarel? Which Sar is going into Olam Haba from Edom? Prat L'Katir Bar Shalom. Katir Bar Shalom was Zoichet to Olam Haba. What is his story? Katir Bar Shalom, I have it. Now, who Kisra, there was a nasty, anti-Semitic, violent, and vicious Caesar. Sonny Yehuda, he hated the Jews. He asked his Senate, if someone has dead skin on his body, like gangrene that's threatening to spread and kill him, should he amputate it so that he can live? Or should he leave it on and it'll continue to hurt him? And he considered the Jews like a disease, like gangrene. So they told him, of course you should kill him. Cut it off. In other words, kill the Jews. So who spoke up? Katir Bar Shalom. Katir Bar Shalom, you can't do that. Chada, number one, you can't do it. The lo yachas l'kulu, you'll never be able to get all the Jews. I spread them out to the four corners of the earth. Frankly, what does it mean, Hashem? What does that mean? My kamar, ilema the betadra hoy. HaKadosh Baruch Hu spread them out bedal ruchos. Then it shouldn't say ki arba ruchos hashemayim. It should say ki li arba ruchos hashemayim. Hi ki arba ruchos li arba ruchos mebaylei. Hashem spread us out to the four corners of the earth. That's not what it says. It says that the Eden are like the four corners of the earth. What does that mean? Elo kishem she'ev shaloi lebelei ruchos. Just like the world couldn't survive without winds and breezes, such as last week when it was so hot, if there wasn't a little bit of a breeze, we wouldn't survive. In order for the world to be mekuyim, there has to be Jews all over the world doing mitzvahs, learning Torah, and that keeps the world alive. So therefore, they're everywhere, and there's no way you can exterminate them. That's one reason why you shouldn't try killing the Jews. But another reason is they're going to call you a genocidal maniac. They're going to call you a Hitler. Is that the reputation you want? Amalei, so this nasty Caesar said, you know what? You're 100% right. Maymar Sharper Armit. You're saying good, and I'm going to listen to you. But you upended me. You slugged me up. That's a chutzpah to the Malchus, and Miu called the Zachi, the Malcha, Shadu le Kamunya Chalila. They throw him into this house that's full of soft sand, and you die there. How do you die? There's different shot them in the first, either because you starve to death, you're locked up in there, or could be you sink into the quicksand there and you get buried alive. But whatever it is, you're now Katia was destined, sentenced to death. Katia Bar Shalom. So when the guards were taking to throw him into this place, Aslan, Antoninus saw him being dragged to his death because he defended the Jews. So she said, what a shame the ship is sailing without paying its tax. In other words, you really should get into Olam Haba because you tied your fate to the Jews. Yet you never had a bris. Without a bris, you cannot get into Olam Haba. Do you know what he did? Nafal al Reisha, the Arlosa, he jumped over on his Arla. Either he bit off his Arla or he found the knife and cut his Arla, but he gave himself a bris. Kata, he cut it. Amar, she said, Yahavis Mirsi Chalvus Farvers. Now that you paid your tax, in other words, you got your bris, pass on through, you'll be able to get into Olam Haba. Kikashadule, as they were throwing him in to this execution chamber, Amar, he announced, Kol Nichsoi, all of my possessions, my entire estate, Li Rabbi Kiva, the Chaveir, to Rabbi Kiva and his Chaveir, which Rabbi Kiva interpreted to mean that half of everything Rabbi Kiva gets to keep, and the other half will be split evenly amongst the Chaveir. Yotze Rabbi Kiva v'darash. It says v'hoyel Aaron u'levanov, and we darshan that half goes to Aaron, and the remainder gets split up amongst the Kohanim, either by the lechem aponim or by the shtei lechem, mechta la'aharon u'mechta levanov. So once he gave all of his nechasim to support Torah, Yotze Baskal v'Omra, a Baskal came out and said, Ketia bar Shalai mezumin l'chaye ha'olam haba. Bacha Rebbe cried, Omar, look, yesh koina oilame b'sha'achas. In 1 minute, he was koina his olam haba. Others have to work much harder for it. Yesh koina oilame b'kameshan. So we'll stop here, and Be'ez Hashem, we will continue tomorrow. Some Gittin tomorrow, which will be Gimel Tammuz, the yard site. I'm not sure if it's called a yard site, but with Lubavitch's, it's today that the Lubavitch Rebbe was nifter. The Neshama should have an aliyah, and he should continue to fight for Klal Yisrael and fight to bring us to Geula Sheyaveh B'Meher Yimei. A good tavach, a good tavach.
Gittvach.
Good tavach.